And on to tonight's program. I just want to give a shout out to New Hampshire Audubon. We partner with New Hampshire Audubon for the Hawk Watch station up on Packmanadnock, and we love working with them on that. And we also have partnered with them on land deals, and sometimes we even partner with them on education. And tonight we're so lucky to have Shelby Morelli here from New Hampshire Audubon. Shelby, why don't you tell us about yourself, and then you can just take the program away. And I'll just remind everybody, if you have a question, instead of interrupting Shelby with your question, you can chat it to Miles and me, and at the end of the program, we'll funnel those questions to Shelby. So Shelby, yay, everyone applause.
Thank you so much. Hopefully my internet connection stays. If not, we can certainly move, but I am so excited to be here tonight. Like Susie said, I work here at the New Hampshire Audubon. I am the education coordinator here, so that means lots of different things, as nonprofits usually go. Right now, doing lots of virtual programming. Here at our center, if you aren't familiar with it at all, we have 5 rehabilitated raptors that live here at our center. And if you have no idea what a raptor is, we're going to talk a little bit about it today throughout the program. So we have a bald eagle, a red-tailed hawk, a barn owl, and 2 barred owls that live here at our center. They all have some injury of some sort that kind of makes them non-releasable. So they can't go back to the wild. They wouldn't survive on their own. So they live here with us. They all kind of have a special story, and you're going to get to see one here today a little bit closer, which is hopefully the most exciting part of the program. But what we're going to kind of do is we're going to kind of go over the things that make a raptor. We'll talk about a specific raptor I have here, so you'll get to see him up close. You guys will get to ask questions. Hopefully I can answer all your questions. If I certainly can't, I can always come back, or I can always email you guys if I think about it after. So that's what we're going to do. If you are familiar with New Hampshire Audubon at all, we are an environmental nonprofit. Our mission is to protect New Hampshire's environment for wildlife and for people. And we do that through lots of different branches of the organization. So my main role here is through education. Education is one of our largest branches or pieces of the organization here. We do school programs, we have summer camp, we're doing virtual programming, lots of different pieces of education. And then we have conservation of different species. So we have several different biologists who work here at our center studying different birds, different species, and basically, protecting their environments. And then we have sanctuaries. So we have, I should definitely know off the top of my head how many sanctuaries we have. We have a bunch around the state that we, are managing and protecting for these different species that we're, going to talk about today, as well as some other species that our biologists research. So we have education, we have conservation, land and sanctuary management. We do lots of policy work. There is marketing that goes into a nonprofit. So lots of different little pieces of the organization that all kind of come together to merge into that one big mission that we have, protecting New Hampshire's environment. So that is kind of the gist of New Hampshire Audubon. If you have no idea who we are, our center, unfortunately, here in Concord is closed, but we do have our raptors, and they are still on display. Even though we are closed, our center is closed to the public. They are still on display. So the bird you'll get to see here today, you can always come over and visit them, even when we're not open. So kind of a fun little activity to do. We have hiking trails. There's lots to do here. So even though we aren't open currently to the public, you can still come and enjoy some of the really awesome things that we do here. So without further ado, let's talk about raptors, or hawks in general. I'm gonna kind of tilt my screen here and step back so you can see the entire me, I guess. I have lots of different things up here on my table that I will pick up and show you guys a little bit closer so you can see them. They kind of blend in with all the things around here. But So we'll just quickly go over the, the things that make a raptor, and then we will see our main star of the show here, and then you guys will have a chance to ask questions, and anything you guys want to know, hopefully I can answer for you. So we have lots of different hawks here that live in the state of New Hampshire, from Red-tailed hawk to Cooper's hawk to sharp-shinned hawk. I have a few examples up here. I tried to gather all the hawks that we had around our center. We have a lot of ducks for some reason. So the hawks that I have here, I will show you a little bit closer. And so what was I saying? Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawks, red-tailed hawks, rough-legged, broad-winged hawk, red-shouldered hawk. So there's lots of different types of hawks, and they all, they all have all of these same similar features that I guess you can say all birds have. So there's 5 things that all birds have, and we'll talk specifically about what makes it special to a raptor. The first one being beaks. So raptors have a really special beak in comparison to something like let's say a duck. So ducks use their beak in kind of a special way where they use it to catch fish and aquatic plants, and kind of has a filtering system for, eating things out of the water. Our raptors here, they have a special hook-shaped beak. And if you are familiar with what hawks or raptors eat, they eat things like small mammals. So they are carnivores, which means that they're going to eat meat. We call them our birds of prey. So they need this sharp hooked beak in order to kind of pull food and rip it apart. They don't have teeth like we have. So when we eat things like meat, we normally use a fork and a knife, and we use our teeth to chew it up. These guys, they just have the beak. And so it needs to be really sharp in order for them to be able to kind of rip it apart. This mount I have here is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. And we know that one of the cool things about juveniles or immature red-tailed hawks is when they're first born, they don't actually have that distinctive red tail that you think of when you think of a red-tailed hawk. So this is your typical red-tailed hawk tail, and this is what they look like when they are first born. So more of just like a brownish color as opposed to that distinctive red color. So this is an immature. I'll see, it might cut my head off, but you guys don't need to see me. I just want you guys to be able to see that hook-shaped beak. It is really sharp. My friend who comes out in a little bit, he will be able to show you kind of the mechanisms that he uses to eat his food. This one obviously is a mount, but you can see up a little bit closer that hook shape. And then this end here is really pointy and really sharp. So good for ripping food apart and meat and things. So, and as you can see, these two next to each other, this one is I believe this is a Cooper's, but let me be sure before I tell you that. Yes, so this one here is our Cooper's hawk. He has a very similar beak shape. It's just smaller. So obviously they all have that hook-shaped beak. It just depends on the bird. So something like our bald eagle is obviously going to have a bigger, sharper beak for larger food. And then as we get smaller, so something like a kestrel is going to have a little tiny beak, but it's still going to do the same thing as, for ripping food apart and things, just kind of smaller things. So they all have that hook-shaped, sharp beak. The next thing that all birds have are feet. And raptors specifically have a special type of foot, and it's called a talon. So again, if we go back to comparing it to our duck, they have those webbed feet. They are kind of like a little paddle that they use for pushing themselves through the water. Our raptors use their talons for catching food. So not only for, standing on branches and things, which is obviously pretty important, but also mainly for catching food. So if we look at this one, this is a red-tailed hawk talon. So we have typically 3 in the front and 1 in the back. And these are our what we call digits, or our toes. And they have these sharp nails that they use for basically catching and puncturing food. And they have a really strong grip to their talons. So when they're out catching things, they use that force to kind of grab onto things, and then they'll use their feet in conjunction with their beak to kind of rip things apart. So with some of our birds here, we get to witness them eating. Some of them are kind of shy. So unfortunately, we don't get to see them eat as often, but our bald eagle, what he does is we put his food down on a rock, and he'll come over and he'll kind of stand on it and puncture it with his talons, and then use his beak to rip kind of smaller pieces off. They don't, in the wild, they might just take like a big mouse and swallow it, but they're probably going to rip it apart, because there's some things that they aren't, that they don't really want to eat, and that aren't super pleasant, like the intestines or the stomach and things. So they're going to kind of rip it apart to investigate and find the things that they do want to eat. So that's where their talons kind of come in handy, kind of like their hands, if you will, where they're holding on to things. And then just like the beaks, we have different sized feet and talons. So this one is our red-tailed hawk. Let's see, it's about the size of my hand in total when we're adding the leg and then the talons. And then this one here is our bald eagle. So you can see just the talon itself is probably even a little bit bigger than my hand. I have small hands, but this talon is very large. So obviously when we think about the things that they can eat, they're eating things that are bigger. So things like, our eagle, his favorite food is fish. So he's predominantly going to eat fish. But they could eat something as large as a raccoon, or even something larger than that. So, and then our red-tailed hawks and things are going to kind of stick to our smaller rodents like mice and moles and voles and squirrels and chipmunks. So kind of our smaller mammals. And then we get our kind of into the larger ones with these guys. So their talons can, tell us kind of what they eat just by size. So, and typically for our hawks and things, they have 3 in the front and 1 in the back. It's just a little fun facts about raptors. We have something like this, which is our barred owl talon. So you can see this one has 3 in the front and 1 in the back. This one has 2 in the front, 2 in the back. Our owls are actually what we call zygodactyl, which kind of sounds like a dinosaur. But that just means that they can move one of their digits back and forth. So our hawks and things are fixed with 3 in the front and 1 in the back, but our owls can actually move one of their toes back and forth to kind of, depending on what surface they're on. If they're on like a, smaller branch where they need more, comfort in the back, so they can have 2 in the front, 2 in the back if they're grabbing different things. So that's just a fun little fact about owls, is that they are zygodactyl. All right, so we said they all have beaks, and our raptors have those sharp hooked beaks. We have our feet, which are our talons on our raptors. And then one of the next really important things is their tail. So I have a couple poster things that I'll show you in a minute as well, but this is our red-tailed hawk tail, and it's definitely redder in person. Hopefully you guys can see it, but and this is one of our smaller, this is an owl tail, but I just wanted to show you guys the size difference here. So tails are really important in lots of different things for our birds. The main thing obviously is flight. So without their tail, they would be pretty, unstable, I guess you can say. So their tail helps them to basically stay balanced when they're flying. It acts kind of like a rudder on a boat. So if this bird was flying along and he put his tail kind of maybe moved it up a little, his body would go down. And if he moved it down, he would kind of go up. So, and then side to side as well. So they use their tail in maneuvering different places. And the size and shape of the tail is actually really important as well. And we can get into that a little bit more when we talk about wings. But so different raptors have different kind of shapes and size tails that do different things for them as they're flying. But the main thing here is for balance, especially let's say a red-tailed hawk was balanced on a tree and he didn't have a tail. It would probably be pretty hard to balance. He might fall over backwards. They use their tails for balance to kind of when they're perching and things. Some raptors or some hawks might use their tail for, if they're coming into like a landing area, they could use their tail for kind of like a, to help them land. So lots of different uses for tails and lots of different sizes and shapes of tails. We talked a little bit about it with our red-tailed hawk, how they have different, colorations of their tail. Show you this guy. This is a rough-legged hawk. He isn't in the best condition, but you can get a feel for what these guys look like. You can see his tail is much skinnier. So this is kind of his tail here. And then if we compare it to our Cooper's hawk here, he kind of has a striped tail, and it's, a little bit of a skinnier look than this guy. Obviously, this is a bigger bird than this guy, so the tail would be much smaller. But you can see the different, sizes and shapes that the birds have for their tails. And then if we get into the fourth thing, which is their wings, which their wings are basically for flight. Without their wings, they wouldn't be able to fly. That's why we can't fly. Just kidding. There's lots of other reasons why we can't fly. So, as you can see here, I have two different wings, different shapes, different sizes. And if we look at these right here, so our first one here is a Buteo, and these guys are our red-tailed hawks, broad-winged hawks. What other hawks? So Buteos. Broad-winged hawks. I'm blanking on my hawks here. So our Buteos here, you can see they have these wide tails and these really wide shaped wings, and they kind of have these, I like to call them fingerlings on the end of their wings here. So you can see a wide tail and wide wings. And then if we compare it to something like these guys are our accipiters with an A. And these guys are our Cooper's hawks, our sharp-shinned hawks. And they have kind of a wide wing and then a skinny tail. So you can see similar wing shape to our Buteos, but a little bit, I would say, smaller and less fingerling along the edge. And then they have more of this like rectangle shaped tail, kind of skinnier and, less wide or more of that triangle shape. And then we have our Peregrine, or this is our falcon. So they have the really sharp pointy wings and a really sharp, square rectangle tail there. So these guys are, if you don't know anything about peregrine falcons, they are one of the fastest flying animal, or I would say the fastest animal in the world when they're diving. So these guys can reach upwards of 230 speeds, 230 miles per hour, sorry. And when they're diving and they're catching food and things. So these guys have this special shaped wing where it's kind of this pointy, I like to call it a boomerang shape. They are just used for flying really fast. So you can see that this really skinny tail and these really sharp pointy wings are going to help a bird when they're flying really fast. So our falcons and things, they kind of like to maneuver in and out of trees, and they can catch birds out of the sky because one, they're really fast, and two, they just have that, quick mechanism to them when they're flying. So that wing shape and that tail shape actually help them in streamlining and getting really fast. So you can imagine that something like our Buteo probably isn't going to be great at flying fast. That doesn't mean that they, can't move quickly. It just means that their wings and their tail are shaped differently to do different things. So something like our Buteo with wide wings and a wide tail is going to be really good at soaring. So if you've ever seen a bird just kind of soaring through the sky, I know we've all probably seen turkey vultures who kind of teeter back and forth. They have really wide wings as well. These guys do a lot of soaring through the air. And then as far as catching food and things, these guys really aren't going to be something that can like snatch something out of the air because they're not really designed to be quick like that. They're more of like a sit on a fence post and wait for something to run by on the ground type of bird and kind of grab it off the ground. So they're more of kind of like a sit and wait for something and then soaring as they're moving type of bird. So you can see the difference between those two, the wings and the tail. And then we have our Coopers and our sharp-shinned, our accipiters here that are kind of somewhere in between. They have those similar Buteo wings that are obviously smaller, but then they have that sharp, pointy tail or sharp rectangle shaped tail there that our falcons have for flying fast. So I like to say these guys are kind of somewhere in between. Our Coopers and our sharp-shinned are really like quick and kind of wild birds when we think about them in captivity. So I like to say that they're kind of in between where they have those, wider wings and the skinny tail. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what tail shape and wing shape mean for each bird. And then last but not least is their feathers. So without feathers, these birds wouldn't be able to fly. They wouldn't have wings and they wouldn't have a tail because that's what their entire body is made up of feathers on the outside at least. And then they have bones and muscle and all kinds of things inside, just like we have. But feathers are one of the coolest things, I like to think, because there are so many different types of feathers. They are different colored, they're different shapes and sizes. And just by looking, I have two from actually the same bird. So these are both from our Redtail Hawk. This one obviously is probably a tail feather, and this one is probably, it looks like a flight feather maybe, but we'll talk about the different types of feathers here. So just a few of them. One of the really important ones is their downy feathers. So this guy actually has one sticking out. It's a really good example here. But their downy feathers are really important in keeping them warm. So if any of you have a down jacket at home, you know that's usually what you wear in the wintertime because that's what's going to keep you the warmest. It has those fluffy feathers in it, and that's really good for insulation. So these guys have basically downy feathers underneath all of their top feathers, so all the ones you're seeing, and then underneath there, they're kind of fluffed with fluff, I guess you can say. And then on top of that, they have their flight feathers. So their flight feather are all the feathers that line the edges of their wings. So if you look at here, probably see it a little bit better. Each of these is an individual feather. So these are all flight feathers and they're shaped very differently. And they kind of all do different things. Where the ones on the tips are kind of good for, they can kind of teeter them back and forth. The ones in the center here are really good for that like flapping motion. So their flight feathers are obviously really important with flight. And then they have, on top of that, they have their contour feathers. And their contour feathers are the things that kind of give them their coloration. It can help them camouflage. You notice that a lot of the birds and a lot of the things I have held up to show you guys have been kind of a brownish, whitish, reddish color. Lots of, I would say, like natural colors so they can blend in and be camouflaged. There's not a huge amount of predators on these birds just because they are kind of higher on the food chain and they're one of our birds of prey. So they are typically the predator of the other things. But So they're really good at camouflaging when they, when they need to be, when they're hiding from other things. So their contour feathers are all the ones that kind of give them coloration and the patterns that you see on an everyday bird. Those are their contour feathers. And I just wanted to show you this one because this is, again, one of my favorites. This is, I shouldn't have worn black tonight. I'm sorry about that. This is a bald eagle feather, and this is one of his main flight feathers. So one of the main feathers that goes on his wings, it's probably somewhere in between here and the tips of his wing. We have this is kind of like a striped red-tailed hawk feather. We have our tail of a red-tailed hawk feather, and then we have a little tiny barn owl feather. So as you can just see by looking, I have 4 different feathers here, and they are all very, very different, coming from different parts of the body. So this one is probably a contour feather of our barn owl. Just, they do this thing called molting, which is where they lose feathers every year to kind of, it's kind of like when we're younger and we lose teeth. The feather will fall out and a new feather will kind of come in, kind of push the old feather out. And they basically do it just like our hair grows. It's always changing. And one of the cool things about our hawk here, our red-tailed hawk, is that you can actually age them by their tail feathers. So like I said, when they're first born, they have just that, black or brown tail. And then as they, get older, year by year, they start to grow in these red tail feathers. So it doesn't happen all at once where like all their tail feathers fall out and all new red tail feathers come in. It kind of happens like one by one. Maybe one year they'll lose a couple tail feathers. Next year they'll maybe only lose one. So you can actually look at a red-tailed hawk and say, okay, he only has, two red tail feathers. So he must be at least maybe around 2 years old. You can also do it with flight feathers because theirs do the same thing. Some of them you can look at the sun fadedness of the feathers. So if some of them are lighter, you can tell those are probably the older feathers. The feathers that are like vibrant and look like they are very new, you could say, okay, maybe those are newer feathers that just grew in this year. So feathers are so cool. I think I could look at feathers galore every day. So their feathers are just really important in lots of different things in their life, between camouflage and staying dry and staying warm with those downy feathers and flight. They're really important. So okay, so we just talked about the 5 main things that all birds have, how they're specific to raptors. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to bring my friend out here, and you guys can ask questions. I have lots of things I can tell you about him. If we want to do questions now, we certainly can. If you want to do them, wait till he is gone, we can do that. Totally up to you guys. So I will get him out. Just bear with me a minute as I just got to grab him out of his box.
Shelby.
Yes.
We do have like a couple of questions that are a little bit different. One of them Robbie, who's young, wonders if you could answer why raptors have the same name as some dinosaurs.
Ooh, very good question. So it's funny when I say raptors, if anybody has any idea what raptors are, a lot of the times we get I know what a velociraptor is or things like that. I like to think that maybe they're, I think birds are descendant from dinosaurs from a long, long time ago. I think maybe they've evolved from them. I think that they get that raptor name because they have those sharp talons, kind of like claws like a dinosaur has. Obviously, there might be some more factual, but that is kind of what I like to think, why I think that they're called raptors.
Great. And here's a question from Karen. There was a couple of questions about molting, and one of them is the change in color of a bird's as they age, is that kind of related to hormone changes as they age?
Yes. Yeah. So it just kind of has to do with, of course, like hormones. So as they're getting older and they start to get to sexual maturity where they're, thinking about mating. So typically, I think red-tailed hawks typically reach that in their like first, second year of life. So as those hormones change, the feathers are also changing as well. So, when you think about like songbirds, when they're first born, they're typically that like brown color. And then as they, get the flight feathers and things in as well, they, kind of grow in those colors. So yeah, yeah.
Cool. Okay, and here's one other question about molting. He's very curious. He's wondering if they also molt their downy feathers, or is it just primarily their flight feathers?
Yes. So they're molting all their feathers typically throughout the year. One of the fun things about having captive raptors here at our center is we get to deal with all their molting feathers. So they typically molt between right before wintertime. So they're getting a lot of those downy feathers in, and then before summer where they're kind of losing all those feathers so they can be cooler in the summertime. And they do lose a lot of those downy feathers, and they're just like everywhere. And they're like little fluffy feathers. Actually just like pulled a few off of me because they're just everywhere all the time. So yeah, they lose all the contour, all the flight, and all the downy feathers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shelby. All right, we are ready for the special guest. Not that Shelby's not a special guest too, but you have a very special guest.
I'm not as exciting. All right, so I don't know if you guys want to guess what this guy is before I tell you. It's kind of hard to tell just by looking at him from this way, but if I spin him around here, if he lets me, you guys can get a better shot of his tail. So he is a red-tailed hawk. This guy has been here at our center he's been here since 2003. And when he came to our center, one of the cool things about him is that he came without his red tail. So we know that he is at least 17 years old, or I'll say he's pretty much 17 years old because when he first came, he was an immature or a juvenile. So he's been with us pretty much his whole life. He was, we think he was hit by a car. He was found injured, and you can kind of see this wing here on my left. His right side kind of droops a little bit. That's the wing that was injured. One of the really cool things about birds in general is that they have hollow bones. So they are really light for flight, and they, make them easily buoyant and very light. But one of the bad things about hollow bones is that they unfortunately are easily breakable. So this guy was injured and he broke his wing. He was brought to a rehabilitation center, and he was fixed up. I believe he actually had some surgery to repair his wing, but it just didn't heal all the way. Not enough for him to be able to go out in the wild and fly on his own and be able to find his own food. So we like to call him a semi-flighted bird. What that means is that he can get around his enclosure. We don't encourage him to fly. We don't make him fly around. He has lots of different levels of perches, so he can kind of hop up and down from different perches if he wants to, but he mostly spends most of his time up on the highest perch that he has. So just kind of what these guys typically would do. Yeah. if you guys have, I know I can kind of see questions like flooding in as we're going. So if you want to filter those, we can certainly do that. I can share and talk if there aren't any questions.
I'll filter out some questions for you. Does he have a name? That's a big question.
That is a good question. So he doesn't have a name. We just call him the Redtail Hawk. And the reasoning for that being, like I said, he has been here for a while, but when he came to our center, he was a wild bird. So we try to keep them as wild as possible by just calling them what they are. This guy isn't my pet. I don't get to take him home and like snuggle with him. He certainly wouldn't like that. Neither would I. But he's not my pet. He's a wild animal. And he has, wild tendencies. So we just try to keep them as wild as possible by calling them what they are. That's a really good question.
Yeah, and people always wonder that, and different places have different ways of doing it.
I know.
Yeah, we had Vince do a program a couple of weeks ago, and they named their birds after where the bird was found.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, they had a peregrine named Hawaii. He was found in Hawaii, kind of interesting. Okay, how long will the red-tailed hawk live in captivity? He's 17, so how long do you think he'll live for?
So these guys in captivity can live upwards of like 30 years. In the wild, obviously they live a little less, unfortunately, due to like predation and lack of food supply and things. But here in captivity, where we know that he's getting food every day, he doesn't have to worry about something, hunting him or trying to hurt him or anything like that. They can live for much longer than they typically would in the wild. So, yeah.
Because his needs are being met.
Yes, exactly. He doesn't have to, he has an enclosure where there's, shade, there's protection from the elements, there is food being provided every day, and ample food to supply him, even if something were to happen and he didn't get food for 2 days, he would still be fine. Because like in the wild, that is very possible for these guys, where they don't find food for a couple of days. So yeah, he gets ample food and protection.
Tell us what's on his menu for food. What do you feed him?
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Good question. So in captivity, these guys eat, they kind of eat 3 different things here. They eat things like mice, rats, and quail. Today he actually has some quail, and he keeps looking over here like he wants some. So I'm going to give him just a couple pieces. It might help him calm down here. So yeah, typically in the wild, he wouldn't eat a quail just because he couldn't probably catch a quail. But it's just a food source that is good for them here. He's struggling with this piece of food here. So you're going to kind of get to see him use his talons to adjust the food and be able to kind of pull it. So you can see, I'll move him a little bit closer. He's struggling here. But then in the wild, obviously they're going to eat things like, moles and voles and squirrels and chipmunks and mice and things. So, but we try to keep them eating, a lot of the same diet that they would typically eat in the wild. So today he has some quail, and yesterday I think he had rat. So yeah.
And when you feed them, they're dead already? Like you don't give them live?
Yes, yeah. So we don't. And the reasoning for that being that, in the wild, natural selection, things happen in the wild. Animals can, if this guy were to catch, let's say like a squirrel or something, it could actually injure him. So in captivity, we just want to make sure, kind of going along the same lines of making sure that he has all of his needs met, making sure that he is getting the safest, most nutrient possibilities he can. That doesn't mean that I guess it's been a couple of years now. A couple of years ago, we had a chipmunk get into his enclosure, and he did catch it and he did eat it. So he does have those like tendencies to still be able to catch food and things. That being said, our bald eagle, he had so I was coming in every day and there was like mammal poop on the ground. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm running through my head what this could be. Is there, somebody putting this in here? What is happening? And right now I'm the only one feeding. So I'm like, it's not me. I know I'm not doing it. And so I set up a camera in his enclosure to see what was going on. And every night there was like a tiny hole in like the front wall. In comes a possum. And he just comes in and he eats the leftovers from the bald eagle. And then I guess he poops and then he strolls out. And, but the bald eagle just sat there and didn't do a single thing, just sat there and looked at it. And so, I mean, it all depends on the bird, I guess you can.
Well, and the enclosures that you have for the animals, they're outside with a sheltered spot for them?
Yep. So they all are kind of sequentially next to each other, and they all have an area where they could stand in the elements in the sun. They also all have a shaded area where it's also covered so they could get away from the elements. They all have what we call perching boxes. So areas where they have, can kind of get away from if the public is there, they can kind of get away if they want to. They all have some sort of winter warming wall. So it's just kind of a panel where they can kind of go and hang out in front of if they get cold, although none of them ever hang out in front of them in the wintertime. So, it's just a matter of what the bird is kind of feeling. But yes, they're outside, so they're kind of exposed to the elements, but they can get away if they want to as well.
Oh, great. That's great. And tell us what other birds. You have bald eagle, you have the redtail, and then do you have an owl?
We have a barn owl who is a captive raised barn owl. He came from a facility in South Carolina. So the cool thing with him is that there's nothing physically wrong with him. It's just that he is too used to humans. So his injury is just that he thinks he's a human. So he is a fun bird to work with because he, is fully flighted. All of our other birds have injuries to their wings of some sort, so they kind of just hop around. He's a fully flighted bird. So, wow. And then we have 2 barred owls, a male and a female, that have been here together since like 1993, I think. So they've both been here for a while. And then we had a screech owl up until very recently who was here for 9 years. And unfortunately, he was just old. So, but yeah. And then we had a peregrine falcon a while ago. I guess it's been 3 years now. So yeah, those are the birds we have.
Very cool. And if people came to the McLean Center in Concord, the Audubon Center there, they can walk and see them.
Yep.
The center's not open, but they could walk by the enclosures and see them.
Yes. So the way our building is set up, the way when you kind of drive into the parking lot, it looks like you just can see the building. But if you walk around the building, there's a pathway that kind of leads you down to, it's kind of like a screened in area, and you can actually go in and look at the different enclosures, and they're all out there. The only reason they wouldn't be there is if they were out doing a program or something like this. But yeah, they're all on display even when we aren't open. So
great. So here's a question about it. If Redtail lived in the wild, would he only eat things that he caught, or would he ever eat roadkill?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I would say these guys are predominantly looking for things that they can catch. That doesn't mean that he wouldn't eat something that is dead, but they, are obviously going to want to eat something that is something they've recently caught. But that doesn't mean that, let's say this guy hasn't had food for 3 days and he is starving and he comes across a porcupine on the side of the road, he's probably going to come down and eat it just because he's hungry. The issue with roadkill and things is that a lot of the times these birds swoop down to get roadkill and unfortunately get hit by cars. That is a lot of how these guys end up in rehab centers. I think like 4 out of the 5 of our birds are products of getting hit by cars and having broken wings. So it's possible that they're going to come down and, eat roadkill, but it's not the safest option for them. But if they're really hungry, they might. Yeah.
Cool. And Shelby, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you become a Raptor Wrangler?
Ooh, good question. So I went to school for wildlife biology and conservation. I never had a lot of interest in birds. Now I think birds are incredible, raptors specifically, obviously. But I started out working here at New Hampshire Audubon, working with our summer camp program. And from there, I started working with our animals. And I had the opportunity to go to a workshop in Florida it's called the Natural Encounters Center, working with training, it's really any type of animal behaviors, and looking at enrichment and the best training practices for any type of animal, really. So I went there and we worked with macaws and goats and lots of different other types of birds. And then most recently, I went to the University of Minnesota to their Raptor Center and got to handle lots of different birds there and learn more about the captive side of it. A lot of my experience just came from working here and working with we had somebody who used to work here working with our birds, and he has since moved on, and I've kind of taken over that. So I kind of stumbled into it, but I love it and it's awesome. I think that these guys are amazing, and I just kind of gained experience from them from different workshops and, just working with them every day. So
yeah. That's really cool. And Amanda's wondering what Redtail Hawk's natural habitat would be.
Ooh, good question. So these guys typically nest in wooded areas. We have a Redtail Hawk that lives out in one of our really big, tall pine trees outside our center. They actually talk to each other sometimes. This guy will talk to the one out in the wild. So I think that's really cool. So wooded areas, if they can find an area that is adjacent to a field where things like our small rodents and things are going to live, a forested area would be ideal for them to build their nest. And then, a field area is great for catching the food and things. A lot of times these guys are kind of found not in, rural or urban areas, but, kind of somewhere in between, where there's houses, where there's bird feeders, where there's squirrels to eat off the bird feeders, things like that. So, in the wild, a forested area is ideal for them.
That's great. So here's a question about his hunting style. So I ambush predator, kind of like he waits in the tree, sees something. So talk a little bit about the Redtail Hawk's vision.
Ooh, okay. So a lot of our raptors have really, really good vision. They need to obviously be able to see things, tiny little things scurrying around the ground from way up in trees. One of the cool things about, or I guess we could say it's kind of a disadvantage, but not really, is that their eyes are actually a fixed, I don't want to call them eyeballs because they're not balls shaped. They're kind of more of a tube shaped. So their eyes actually can't move at all, which is why you can see him. He moves his head a lot because he can't, if my hand is over here, he has to be able to move his head to see it. So while their eyesight is really good, they don't have a lot of great peripheral vision because they can't move their eyes at all. So when we think about, looking around and things, we can look around without moving our heads. But these guys have to move their heads. So I'm not 100% sure of how many these guys have, but things like our owls, we have 7 vertebrae in our neck, or bones in our neck, that allow us to kind of move our head around and like look all around us. We obviously can't spin our heads all the way around like our owls and things can. But they have 14 bones. So they have double the amount of bones that we have, so they can move their heads a whole lot further. You can see this guy does something pretty cool with his neck. I'll see if I can get him to do it without him freaking out. He typically will like leave his head in one place and his body will move. So he's kind of using that technique to kind of spot things on the ground. And then their eyesight, as I said, is really good as well. So their neck is really flexible.
Oh, nicely explained. Shelby, we're wondering about the wildfires out west. And if you have noticed, like even though the smoke, we don't sense that we're breathing it, but we can see it on our sunsets and our sunrises and the hazy skies. Have you noticed if the raptors at Audubon are being impacted in New Hampshire by kind of poor smoky air quality?
That is a good question. I haven't noticed, anything. These guys are pretty, they're pretty good about telling you if something is up with them. And just over like the last few weeks, I haven't, or the last, couple weeks, I haven't noticed anything. So, which makes me think that, maybe they're not super affected by it, but that doesn't mean that, I don't speak bird. I would love to, that would be cool. But I don't know if they're affected by it. They don't seem to be. They all have, fresh water and things if they ever got, I don't know, too hot or anything like that, but I don't think so. I don't know.
Here's a question about the kind of healthcare. If you notice that one of the raptors that you're caring for isn't feeling well, isn't behaving, or seems ill, are there special vets?
Yes.
That you take the raptors to?
Yeah.
Or that they come to you?
Sure. So we work with Dr. Dutton, who is out of Ware, New Hampshire, and Hopkinton. He specializes in exotic birds and things like raptors. So he does all of our vet work. Typically once a year, he'll come to our center and just check them up, make sure that they are healthy. These guys get West Nile virus shots, just to ensure that they, aren't going to get anything while they're out in their enclosures. Because, there are things that come in and he checks them over, checks their, you can monitor a bird's well-being by a lot of different things. A Keel score, so Keel, is one of the ways you can tell we call it the well-being of these birds. And it is kind of like their breastbone. So our sternum here is where theirs is. And you can actually feel the muscle and the fat on their keel. So the ideal Keel score is going to have, you can feel the tip of the keel, but you shouldn't be able to feel like the rest of it. You should feel an even amount of muscle, not a lot of fatty tissue. So that's one of the things he checks for. He checks their talons, their beaks. One of the things we do here kind of on a as needed basis is we trim their beaks and their talons for them. So these guys do a really good job of kind of wearing their talons down on different surfaces they have in their enclosure. So they all have, different rocks, they have different branches, they have different perch wraps and things. So they do a really good job of wearing their talons down and things like they would in the wild on different perches and rocks and things. But their beaks do tend to get a little bit longer in captivity. This guy actually, he is due for some beak trimming here relatively soon. So when it gets too long, it can start to like curl under, which would be an extreme situation. You saw earlier that first piece of food I gave him kind of got stuck on the tip of his beak. That I can just tell is a little bit too long for him there. So we just kind of have like grooming days, if you will, like you were to trim your dog's nails or things like that, they get the same treatment. So when the vet comes, he does check those things as well, but we try to do it ourselves as we can. It's not a fun experience. So when they're out, we try to, get all the things done as possible. But if they were to ever get sick, we can bring them to his office or he comes to us. Really good question.
Yeah, thank you. And I have two last questions. One question is back to the beak trimming.
Sure.
We're wondering, how do you do the beak trimming so that you're safe and the bird is safe and not too scared?
So we have a specific room that we do it in. So when all the vet work and all the beak trimming and everything like that all happens in this one room. So I don't ever wear this like leather glove when I'm doing it, because this is kind of, we're going out for a program, you're learning to stand on the glove, you're learning new skills and things. When we do our beak trimming and our like vet work and things, we make sure that we have these like big yellow gloves, and they know, okay, I see the big yellow gloves, that's what's going on. We kind of cradle them where they're on their backs, and then we just kind of cover them in a towel and leave their beak exposed, and we try to do it as quick as possible. The process of the beak trimming, we use a Dremel, so it's really quick, it files really quickly, and we try to get them in and out as quick as possible. But yeah, we have some big heavy duty gloves that we kind of use for them, and then we wrap them in a towel to make them feel kind of secured. On their back isn't really the happiest place for these guys, but it's a quick and painless process. So try to do it as quick as possible.
I can ask you my last question if you want to put the redtail back.
He looks like he's had it for the evening, but
give him a thumbs up. And when you come back, I'll ask the last question. Oh, it's so cool. All right, Shelby, thank you so much. Is your arm get tired?
My hand does, surprisingly. It's like gripping onto him to make sure he doesn't get away, obviously. But
yeah. Well, that wasn't the last question. This is the last question from Karen, and she's wondering if you can tell the difference between male and female red-tailed hawks by their color, or if it's more secret than that.
Sure. So it is really hard to tell the difference between a male and a female, unfortunately. They pretty much look the same. The only difference is that the females tend to be a little bit bigger. But unless you have two standing next to each other, it's really hard to tell kind of the difference between which one's bigger and which one's smaller. In the bird world, that's typically, or in our raptor world, I guess I can say, the females tend to be a little bit bigger, but it's really hard to tell the difference just by looking at them if you see one in the wild. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Shelby. We give you a big round of applause. If you were at the Harris Center, we'd be standing on our feet and kind of cheering you. You did a great job. We learned so much, and thank you for sharing the red tail with us. That was such a treat, and hopefully one day, not that far away in the future, sometime we can all be together again and see the red tail in person, which would be great. We usually do have the red tail come up on Pac-Monadnock as part of our big hawk watching event, but that is on hold for this year. So we'll hope to maybe next year, but thank you. And thank you to everybody tonight for showing up and coming out to hear this amazing talk from Shelby from Audubon of New Hampshire. So
yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This has been awesome, and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, like we said, hopefully you guys can come visit here soon, and we can all get together in person.
We would love that. And so here's to a future where we can see raptors in person and things like that. So thank you. And everybody, if you get a chance, head out to a hill near you this weekend and keep your eyes to the sky. I heard it's going to be a good Saturday for hawk watching. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.